And I don't think he'll change. He is committed of his own level of service, and that will remain.
What shocking secrets did Princess Anne reveal about King Charles that left the palace in total chaos? And why has this confession stunned everyone who thought they knew the royal family? From tense confrontations to hidden family dynamics, every detail exposes a side of the monarchy the public has never seen. Behind closed doors, long-buried disagreements, subtle power plays, and decades of carefully guarded decisions all came crashing to the surface. Stay with us, because what Anne revealed about Charles will completely blow your mind. The quiet confession that sent Charles into panic. The morning began like any other in the palace, with the usual hush of anticipation that accompanies a routine family briefing. Advisors shuffled papers and checked schedules while Charles sat in his chair, already tense from the early hours. Anne entered with her usual poised calm, yet there was a subtle edge to her demeanor that few noticed. As she addressed the room, her voice carried more weight than ever before, hinting at a revelation that would leave the room frozen. Suddenly, Anne's words landed, precise and unflinching, as if rehearsed for a moment, decades in the making. She revealed an incident from years prior, a private decision Charles had assumed would remain hidden forever. The confession was delivered with measured clarity, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Charles's face betrayed him instantly, a flicker of disbelief crossing features usually composed in the public eye. No one had anticipated the personal nature of the disclosure. It wasn't a matter of protocol or duty. It was a deeply human revelation, touching on choices Charles had made when he believed the eyes of the palace were blind. Anne had waited years for this moment, and the timing was almost surgical, ensuring maximum impact. Courtiers exchanged nervous glances, sensing the undercurrent of tension that had erupted without warning. Even the air in the room seemed heavier, charged with anticipation, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of the moment. Every subtle gesture, every pause, amplified the gravity of her words, leaving everyone present acutely aware that the conversation had moved far beyond ordinary palace matters. The reaction was immediate and profound. Advisors instinctively reached for notes, attempting to redirect the discussion, but Charles was unmoved. His usual responses, calm acknowledgement, subtle redirection, even mild irritation, failed to surface. Instead, he seemed unmoored, struggling to reconcile the quiet words with the reality they implied. Anne, however, remained serene, unyielding in her choice to speak the truth, however destabilizing. Even as whispers of disbelief rippled among the advisors, she maintained a composed exterior, fully aware that her revelation had permanently altered the emotional landscape of the room. Even the walls seemed to absorb the tension, echoing the gravity of her statement. Every eye in the room was fixed on Charles, whose composure had slipped in ways the public had never seen. The silence that followed was deafening, a pause thick enough to make the air itself tremble. Anne's revelation had not only pierced his defenses, but also shifted the room's emotional climate, turning what should have been routine into a turning point of profound consequence. The context of her confession added layers to the shock. It concerned an overlooked agreement between the siblings, one that had quietly shaped internal hierarchies and decision-making for decades. By bringing it into the open, Anne exposed vulnerabilities that Charles had assumed remained shielded from scrutiny. This was not just about words, it was about power, trust, and the fragile architecture of the family's inner workings. Advisors tried to gauge the implications, whispering to one another, yet Anne maintained a deliberate distance from the chaos she had ignited. Her calm was almost surgical, as if she understood the ripple effects her revelation would trigger and chose to let them unfold naturally. Charles's distress was compounded by the realization that this was not a moment to be contained. It was public in its consequences, even if not yet public in the media. In that quiet room, history itself seemed to pause. Each second stretched into an eternity as Charles grappled with a mix of guilt, frustration, and disbelief. Anne, meanwhile, watched silently, her eyes revealing nothing but determination. The room's usual hierarchy of authority had shifted, subtly yet irrevocably, and every member present felt the tremor of change. The final impact of the confession was not in its scandalous nature, but in its timing and precision. Charles, often able to navigate crises with political skill, found himself exposed to an internal reckoning that had no easy resolution. Anne had transformed an ordinary briefing into a seismic moment of accountability and revelation, and the ripple effects were just beginning to be understood. The advisors slowly exhaled, recognizing that this was no ordinary exchange. The calm facade of the palace had been cracked, and everyone sensed that the balance of control had tilted unexpectedly. Charles's next move remained uncertain, and the questions that arose from this single moment promised to shape conversations for weeks to come. Was this quiet confession merely a spark, or would it ignite a storm that the palace could never contain? Stay with us as the mystery deepens. The shockwaves outside the palace walls. News of Anne's confession, though intended to remain private, began to ripple quietly through the corridors beyond the immediate royal circle. Senior courtiers, initially sworn to discretion, found themselves fielding urgent inquiries from embassies and long-standing royal partners. Each question carried a subtle probe, testing whether the palace had maintained control or whether fractures were now visible. In Commonwealth offices across distant capitals, aides compared notes with British diplomats. Reports described the unusually tense mood during meetings, noting that Anne's words had introduced uncertainty into succession planning, ceremonial roles, and estate oversight. A sense of unease spread, not only about internal power dynamics, but also about how the monarchy's decisions might affect long-standing political relationships. Foreign diplomats, accustomed to reading the monarchy as a pillar of stability, suddenly encountered contradictions. Officials who had relied on decades of precedent began re-evaluating prior agreements, wondering which decisions had been genuinely driven by Charles and which were subtly influenced or redirected by Anne. Quiet inquiries were made, sensitive calls were placed, and the palace's carefully constructed image of unity began to feel precarious. Within London, whispers traveled faster than official statements. Courtiers in tea rooms, private aides, and long-term palace staff exchanged fragmented reports, each conversation intensifying the perception of tension. The rumors were measured, yet every fragment reinforced the idea that authority had shifted behind the gilded walls. Even palace vendors and service staff noticed the difference in atmosphere: more guarded glances, restrained laughter, and a heightened sense of observation. Journalists and historians, though not yet briefed, sensed an unusual energy around public appearances. Small anomalies, a delayed walkabout, a slightly altered seating arrangement, an unusually terse greeting hinted at unseen friction. Insiders recognized these signs immediately. Anne's confession had triggered a subtle, widespread ripple that extended from family chambers to public-facing engagements, disrupting the usual choreography of royal visibility. The ripple even reached charitable foundations connected to the crown. Board members, used to clear lines of influence and authority, noticed shifts in directives, adjusted schedules, and minor yet telling changes in communication style. Decisions once assumed to be finalized by Charles alone now carried the shadow of Anne's strategic perspective. Foundations quietly reassessed priorities, unsure how public perception might respond if the underlying family dynamics became widely known. In the upper echelons of the palace, advisors documented every reaction meticulously. Meeting notes, private letters, and digital correspondences were scanned for signs of misunderstanding, alarm, or opportunity. The confession had inadvertently introduced a new variable into the operational framework of the monarchy, one that required constant monitoring and strategic recalibration. Every ripple became a potential domino in a chain of consequences nobody had anticipated. Even distant royal relatives took note, sending discreet messages of curiosity, concern, and in some cases, subtle alignment. The once predictable web of loyalty and influence now showed unpredictable strands, some favoring Charles, others hinting at cautious support for Anne's newfound leverage. It was a reminder that the palace was not an isolated entity, but a living network of alliances and rivalries constantly in flux. The public, though unaware of the precise details, would soon feel the tremors. Protocol shifts, small delays in announcements, and altered ceremonial arrangements signaled that something had changed. The balance of authority, carefully curated over decades, was no longer a matter of perception alone. Those closest to the family understood that Anne's confession had done more than unsettle Charles. It had quietly shifted the monarchy's operational reality. By the end of the week, the advisors recognized a simple truth. The confession was no longer a private concern. The shockwaves had extended into every layer of interaction, diplomacy, and public expectation. Every decision now carried the shadow of uncertainty, and the palace's outward calm was a thin veneer over a growing undercurrent of strategic reassessment. If one revelation can destabilize both the palace's inner circle and its public image, what other buried truths might surface, subtly altering loyalties and decisions far beyond the palace gates? Stay with us as the secrets grow even darker. A timeline the palace never wanted, publicly. The day after Anne's confession, the palace corridors buzzed with unusual energy. Advisors convened in hushed clusters, scanning old files and correspondence for anything that could contextualize the revelation. Every dusty folder, long considered inconsequential, suddenly became a potential linchpin in a story that might unravel decades of carefully maintained secrecy. Documents from archived family meetings surfaced unexpectedly. Minutes of discussions that were never meant to see the light of day revealed subtle disagreements between Charles and Anne, disagreements that had quietly influenced royal policies and public engagements. These records, now under intense scrutiny, painted a picture of a rivalry far more calculated than the public had ever suspected. Financial ledgers, long tucked away in secure vaults, were quietly reviewed. Advisors traced patterns that linked personal allowances, royal gifts, and estate management decisions to disputes between siblings. Every line item now seemed to carry hidden meaning, suggesting that power struggles had long been masked by formal titles and diplomatic smiles. The palace, for the first time in decades, was forced to confront the reality that private tensions had real consequences for governance and perception. Letters exchanged between the siblings revealed an undercurrent of subtle manipulation. Polite phrases masked pointed instructions, and veiled threats were hidden behind formal expressions of loyalty. Anne's handwriting, meticulous and precise, now told a story of strategic patience, revealing that the confession was not spontaneous, but the culmination of years of observation and careful timing. Unseen photographs from official events added a visual layer to the timeline. Images of Charles appearing hesitant in moments where he should have been assertive, Anne quietly asserting herself beside him, and advisors caught mid-reaction revealed patterns that were invisible in real time. Each photograph, when placed in chronological order, seemed to reinforce Anne's narrative, corroborating details previously dismissed as coincidence. Telegrams and private messages, once considered trivial, took on new weight. They documented exchanges with foreign officials and distant relatives, revealing that Anne had long been aware of how certain decisions would echo beyond the palace. The timeline constructed from these communications highlighted a pattern of strategic foresight, making it clear that her confession was not just personal, it was a calculated disclosure with implications for the entire monarchy. The advisors themselves were caught off guard by the sheer volume of information coming to light. Many had assumed the past was firmly sealed, that old disagreements were irrelevant in the current political climate. Anne's revelation and the documents it brought into focus proved otherwise. They now faced the delicate task of reconstructing a coherent story from fragments, fully aware that each detail could alter public perception and internal dynamics. Even the most minor incidents gained newfound significance. A seemingly casual remark during a royal tour, a brief disagreement over scheduling, and even overlooked debates in committee meetings now became pieces of a mosaic, illustrating tension, ambition, and foresight. Every event, once benign, was now a potential pivot point that could support Anne's version of history. Historians and biographers inside the palace quietly took note, recognizing the significance of this forced transparency. Notes were made, timelines updated, and analysis conducted in secrecy. These moments of meticulous reconstruction revealed not only the scope of Anne's insight, but also the potential vulnerability of Charles, whose public persona of controlled authority was now at odds with the subtle, persistent influence of his sister. By evening, the reconstructed timeline had grown into a comprehensive map, charting decades of influence, rivalry, and decisions that were never public knowledge. Advisors realized that the confession was not just an isolated shock, it was a revelation that could reshape narratives, reinterpret past events, and challenge assumptions held by the monarchy itself. The implications reached far beyond palace walls, touching matters of succession, estates, and even foreign diplomacy. The final realization settled like a weight on those tasked with managing the fallout. Anne's confession had done more than reveal a secret. It had forced the palace to revisit its own history, exposing patterns, decisions, and power dynamics that had been carefully buried. Charles was no longer simply reacting to a personal disclosure. He was facing a systemic challenge to the image of authority he had spent decades cultivating. As whispers of the reconstructed timeline began to ripple through the corridors, one pressing question lingered. If decades of private maneuvering could be unveiled so swiftly, what other truths had been waiting in silence, ready to emerge? Come with us to explore the hidden corners of the story. The aftermath Anne didn't expect. The day after the shockwaves reached beyond the palace, Anne found herself navigating a landscape that had shifted in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Allies she had counted on for quiet support suddenly seemed distant, their expressions guarded, their conversations clipped. Courtiers who had long maintained cordial relations with her now hesitated before offering assistance, as if unsure whether the tides of influence had truly shifted. Unexpected alliances began to emerge. Junior staff, previously invisible in the hierarchy, started approaching her with insights and suggestions that revealed they had noticed patterns and discrepancies long before anyone else. Their loyalty was cautious but evident. They respected her courage in exposing truths, even if it unsettled the established order. Anne realized that influence no longer resided solely in titles or official positions. It had quietly migrated to those who had the foresight to see beneath the surface. At the same time, cold shoulders and subtle resistance reminded her of the risk she had undertaken. Advisors who had once acted as mediators became distant observers, unwilling to engage directly. Their silence was telling. Every meeting, every conversation now carried an undercurrent of scrutiny. Anne sensed that while her disclosure had shifted the balance of power, it had also created fractures she would need to navigate delicately if she wanted to preserve relationships and maintain her standing. The royal schedule, once predictable, became a minefield. Invitations to private briefings were scrutinized for hidden agendas, and small adjustments to meetings or ceremonies carried layers of meaning that required careful interpretation. Anne began to see the ripple effect of her words in real time. Every decision she made, every move she undertook, now resonated far beyond her immediate intentions. She also faced the weight of public perception, even indirectly. Though the confession had not yet been made public, leaks of subtle shifts reached journalists and historians through discreet channels. Analysts pieced together hints of tension and internal recalibration, creating a sense of anticipation in the outside world. Anne's role as the catalyst for these shifts had not gone unnoticed, and she felt the pressure of responsibility multiply with every passing hour. Privately, Anne contemplated her next steps. The truth she had revealed could not be retracted, yet she understood that the consequences extended far beyond personal vindication. She needed to decide whether to consolidate influence quietly, stepping into a more deliberate strategic role, or to maintain her distance, allowing the palace to recalibrate itself while preserving her independence. Every option carried risk, and every decision now mattered on a scale she had only glimpsed. Anne received quiet acknowledgement from family, realizing her confession had reshaped palace dynamics. She understood that navigating the aftermath required patience and insight, as the monarchy had become a landscape of subtle power shifts. Her revelation marked the start of a long-term recalibration of influence, both for herself and the institution. Were you shocked by the explosive details Princess Anne revealed about King Charles and the chaos it caused behind palace walls? Share with us which moment left you speechless.